Celtics Reddit podcast.
Back out to Smart. Fakes the pass all the time. Three. Bang!
Gets Williams screen. Lobs it up for Robert Williams.
Shouldn't he know? Jaylen Brown. What a thunder!
Tatum. Durant, the long reach. Tatum crossover, pull-up jumper. It's good! 50 points for Jason Tatum.
Hello and welcome to the Celtics Reddit podcast. Ben Vallis here. Thank you for joining us. Hope you're doing well. We've got an awesome guest for you today. Ryan Bernardoni, aka dangercart, a pillar of Celtics Twitter, also the creator of rosterbuilder.com and former editor-in-chief of Celtics Hub. The great Wayne Spooney joins us as well. Let's get into it. All right, folks, as promised, we're joined by the original architect of Celtics Reddit and former editor-in-chief of Celtics Hub, Ryan Bernardoni, aka dangercart. Thanks for joining us, Ryan. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Yes, I'm only former things these days. No current anything other than Celtics watcher. But yeah, no, I'm doing okay. How are you guys doing?
Yeah, doing well, thanks. Thanks for coming on. I guess current user on Twitter would be an apt description.
Sure.
You're a frequent, projector of various musings on Twitter, which we all lap up and enjoy, and your various podcast appearances as well. And now, thankfully, this one. So thanks for coming on. Let's just jump straight into it, shall we? On the recent Winning Plays podcast you did with Brian Robb, also former Celtics Hub, you said that you think the Celtics are a better team after the deadline. You think they are. The consensus among the fan base is that they certainly are better. And there's a recent Reddit user comment here on a post-game thread. This is by Gruff25P. They say back-to-back games, holding the other team to 40 points in the second half, and the Nuggets and the Hawks are no offensive slouches. So how much, if at all, has the needle moved there for you, Ryan, based on what you've seen in an admittedly small sample size in these two games with Derek White, Suns, Josh Richardson since the deadline?
I mean, it hasn't changed that much, but that's not like a knock on what the team's doing now, right? The thing is, like, no matter what you do in those two games, they were playing very well before the trade deadline, right? Like, they were blowing teams out in the couple weeks before. So you can't, like, look at those two games and say, oh my goodness, they've turned it all around. Like, they had already kind of turned it around since they got healthy. What you can say is that it looks good, right? It doesn't look worse. There's no sort of like immediate, oh my gosh, Derek White doesn't fit next to Marcus Smart or anything like that. Like, which I don't think anybody believed was going to be the case, but until you see it to at least some extent, it's always a possibility, that it just, for whatever reason, they don't mesh or something like that. So you sort of remove some of those edge case, oh goodness, this could be a disaster for some reason scenarios. But in terms of like, are they better than they were before? I mean, I think so. It's sort of the same that when I was talking to B-Rob, like, I think that they're better. I think in the simplest terms of like, they replaced, if you take the top 7 guys, the top 8 gets a little more complicated because who is the 8th player at this point and stuff like that. But, you do see teams cut to 7-player rotations in big playoff games. And like, I think that their 6th and 7th players are better than they were before the deadline. So from that standpoint, I think they're more talented. But, it would be almost like disrespectful to the way that the team was playing before the deadline to say that we've seen something significantly better than that, just because, like, how much better could you be than what they were or what they have been when healthy up to the deadline? Like, every time they're healthy, other than the first couple of games of the year, it's like they're blowing teams out and holding everybody to 40 points. Like, they were good before is, I guess, the point.
Do you buy that these past two games where Derek White's played, he's played like all of crunch time. I think he played 17 minutes straight to end the game against the Nuggets. I saw some buzz, and I kind of feel this way too. This is the type of game we would have lost earlier in the season, and whether it's White or the team just playing better. But a lot of that playing better was against terrible teams, and these were two legitimate teams. I mean, the Nuggets are kind of handicapped in a lot of ways, but do you buy that there's, can you evaluate that there's something different with the way they kept, the way they held it together in crunch time, or is it too early to tell?
Yeah, same. I mean, sort of the same. It's a little bit too early to tell. If, like, the problem that they had in crunch time early in the season was, I think you could attribute to a couple of things. One was just bad luck, right? You can always say in these situations, like, there's just some amount of luck, and like, if you miss all your shots, there are going to be games where you make some of them, and then you would win those games. But in terms of like rotational things, The problem was that they were playing Dennis Schroeder and Marcus Smart together, and whenever they did that, it was a disaster. And they had already gone away from that. So would they have won these games anyway if they were playing Josh Richardson or Grant Williams in those minutes? I mean, we have no way of knowing, right? You can't rerun the game. But they had been playing better in those situations. These also didn't end up being particularly close games, right? Like they beat the Nuggets by double digits. And you can say that these were better teams. Like they're better offensive teams. The Hawks are the 10 seed right now, and they were missing John Collins. And the Nuggets are, missing whatever, $60 million of players for the entire year. So these are not juggernaut teams. They're not entirely out of line again with the teams that they were beating before the deadline. It's just pre-deadline, post-deadline, they're winning games by double digits against teams that are decent or, in some cases not. But so they haven't really been tested in crunch time with the new lineup, and they hadn't recently been tested in crunch time with the new old lineup. So again, like we just really don't know. Like I know we want to be able to answer these questions right now, and in some cases you just unfortunately can't. But again, I mean, it looks good. It's better than when it was Dennis Schroeder because we know what didn't work. So that's what I mean by like we have not seen any like big red flags that Derek White won't work like we did very early on with Dennis Schroeder, and unfortunately they persisted with that through, I think for what most people would say was too long, but they had moved off it before the deadline. That had been basically thrown into the bin. So it's good. I mean, it's not just good about the players, right? It's also good that you see the coach making these adjustments and recognizing that these things needed to change. So it's better on multiple fronts. But I don't know. Would they have lost those games if Josh Richardson was playing? Probably not. I mean, they won by 10. Like how big of a swing is it really?
Yeah, super hard to gauge is what I'm hearing because they were awesome and are still awesome. And until we see more sample size, it's kind of hard to bring down the hammer or give a verdict there. Speaking of the Derek White trade and acquisition, I definitely understand the disappointment around the draft capital given up for Derek White. The first round pick this year, the pick swap in 2028. But if our primary goal is to win a championship and our secondary goal is to re-sign the Jays because we think having both Jays is the best path towards a title, why do we not value Derek White more than a first round pick this year and a swap in 6 years? If White is something that's going to show the Jays, yes, like we're all about putting the right team around you. We're all about winning now and getting some longevity out of Derek White and his contract that he's got for a few years now. Why is that not more valuable than that pick and the pick swap in 6 years' time?
So I don't think it's a question of like pure value in this situation. It's more about practice and like how you operate as a franchise and a front office and what things are, you should be trading and what things you shouldn't and in what situations you should. In terms of just pure value, it's really hard to value a pick swap 6 years down the line that's top 1 protected. Like, what is the value of that? Teams don't trade that because you're courting disaster by trading that. Like, it's just the kind of thing that you only trade if you're backed into a corner or if you're in pure win now. So if you're the Bucks last year and it's like, we have Giannis, he has to accept the supermax, we will put everything on the table, then that's a different situation. If you have LeBron James saying you must do this because I'm 37 years old, you end up in a different situation with the types of moves that you're making. But it's rare that when you have other assets that you can give up, that any team gives up that type of thing that far into the future when it's just, who knows? Like, it's just so big of a risk to take. And because of that, it's hard to value. But it's also not that it's not Derek White versus a first round pick and a far future pick swap. It's Josh Richardson, who I don't think is as good of a player as Derek White, but like it is more than like the net move here is not just this one pick and a future pick out. You're also sort of have to take it in the larger context of Richardson leaving and Schroeder leaving and Theis coming in with him and sort of the larger picture of the deadline. And that's really where I have a problem with it, is that it's more of the sort of scope of the early Brad Stevens GM experience where you have a lot of moves that you look at and you're like, maybe that's a good move, it's a reasonable move, at least it's this or that. But like the edges of getting everything you can and the good practice of not sort of throwing away opportunities to pick up every little thing that you can is where there's a problem. And in terms of like the context of the Jays, because I think in the context of if you think this team is going to compete for the title right now, and I'm not against that argument. I think I'm probably higher on the team than almost like most people are for the right now. You can make the argument of like the Pat Riley sort of like, who cares about picks? We'll figure it out later. Just throw it away and like we want to win now. So you can make that argument. The argument about the Jays and about wanting them to re-sign, well-run franchises that have good futures, that are able to be flexible and make moves as they go year over year, are the places where players generally want to stay. And the problem with giving away these pick swaps and things like that is not that it's like guarantee that 6 years down the line they're going to have the number 2 pick and lose it. It's that encumbers you in a lot of other things over a long period of time, and that it's generally just not a good practice. And I think there's been some other signs of things like that too, where they haven't been like squeezing everything they can out of these moves. So that's where more of my concern comes from than like Derek White's a bad player to go get. I don't have a problem going and getting Derek White. I just think that the way they are evaluating or valuing assets right now is maybe not ideal for the early Brad Stevens tenure.
Yeah, I think right when I saw that trade, I immediately thought that's probably a slight overpay, if not more than a slight overpay for Derek White. What I will say is, and really, do you agree with this premise? Brad has been pretty good, I think, as a talent evaluator so far. The early returns are pretty good with Richardson. He identified a guy that was a distressed asset, went and got him, turned him into at least a neutral contract. Al overpaid, obviously not ideal on that contract, but he's been a key cog with the team. And then I think Schroeder gets a tough rap. I don't think some of Schroeder's failures were all on Udoka. Nonetheless, he's a really talented guy for the taxpayer MLE. So if Brad said Derek White is underutilized in San Antonio, I need to go get this guy because I truly think he's the fourth piece. You know, he's that fourth best guy on the championship team. Does that change how you would evaluate? I know it's risky with the swap, but I mean, if he's really convinced, does that matter, or do you not really care and just think that's too much risk to take on with a swap?
I mean, I don't particularly care, but I don't matter, right? Like, who cares what I think? I'm wrong all the time. It doesn't mean anything what I think. Like, and that's where I go on. Like, I think the general shape of like their practice right now is not wonderful. Now you have Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown and Marcus Smart and Robert Williams, and that's going to cover for a lot of sort of not getting the extra 2% here and there, right? And it has covered them for not having like legitimately bad player and roster management over the last couple of years. Why are they still a good team? It's because you have this like core of a really good team that covers up for a lot of sins. And so it doesn't particularly matter to me. I don't know about the idea of like Brad has proven to be a good talent evaluator to this point. I think the players we've picked up have basically performed to the level that you would have expected them to. Josh Richardson probably a little bit better. Schroeder, I think exactly. I mean, if you look at his numbers this year versus last year, they are like eerily similar. They are exactly the same. Horford, he was playing well last year. I think he's kind of played the same. Like he's played well. He's probably been a little bit better on defense than we expected. The restrictions on how much he can play is the biggest thing with him at this point. And a lot of what you make your bones on as a talent evaluator, as a front office person, is the draft. And like they haven't done any drafting with Brad. So it's really hard to make the case there as to like getting any sort of read on him. And I think that's where, for all that Ainge gets ripped for his drafting, that's actually where he was probably the best over his time with the Celtics, that he was a very good talent evaluator actually in the draft. Everybody has misses, right? But so I don't know. Like, if you're asking like if I give Brad the benefit of the doubt as a front office person at this point because of the moves he's made so far, then I would say no to that. I don't think he's done anything like exceptional. But again, like it's his job, and if that's what he believes, then I understand that he would operate in that way of saying like, this is the guy who I believe in and I'm staking my reputation on, and so I'm going to overpay for it. The problem is that what then happens if it doesn't work out is that the person who gets fired isn't there when this 6 year down the line pick swap, becomes something that's encumbering a future, the person who's leading the team at that time. So it's kind of easy to do that, to trade stuff way out into the future, because either you're a success and don't care, or you're gone and don't care. So yeah, no, I mean, I don't give him the benefit of the doubt at that point, but again, like, who am I to judge? I don't know anything.
Well, we
But thanks
think
for
you
having
do.
me on
That's
the
why
pod.
we've invited you on. Yeah. Look, 2028, I'll be 41, and I refuse to believe that day will ever come. So as far as I'm concerned, we're not offering up any real asset because that day will never
that
arrive.
may as well not exist. Yeah.
I'll be there in 10 weeks, so I'll be
Apologies.
41 in what, the end of April. So well, hopefully we're still around by that point.
Yeah, it's all relative.
We'll be right
sticking with
on
Brad,
our way to a championship by then. Come on.
We might be
10 weeks from now?
It's not wildly out of the question.
Agreed.
Yeah. Well, we look forward to having you back on the pod to talk about the 2028 title. In the meantime, sticking with Brad as part of his tenure, short-lived tenure so far with the Celtics in this new role, there's been a lot of celebration around possessing these quote-unquote tradable contracts, so mid-tier contracts that are somewhat easily moved to free up cap space or potentially a sign and trade for a third star. You had recently mentioned that Theis should or could be viewed as a negative value contract around the league, but given the salary and what he makes per year, why do we not view Theis's contract in that same sort of flexible / tradable category?
I mean, it's fine to be a tradable contract, but if you're a negative value contract, then you have to give stuff in order to use that contract as a piece of a trade. You would rather have mid-sized flexible contracts that are positive value if you're looking to package them together and make some sort of big trade. And the team has those as well. Robert Williams is going to look like one of the best contracts in the entire league over the next 4 years, and he makes about the same as what Theis is going to be making, in the next couple of years, a little bit more, but not like hugely more. So yeah, I mean, it's fine to say like that you could move that contract, but it's still a negative value contract for a backup center across the league, a third center on this team, and a player who wasn't playing for the team that gave him that contract. And it's a bad team. The Rockets are not any good, and they weren't playing him after just signing him. So I think, and because of the position he plays, it just is a negative value contract. And it's weird that now there's this report from Steve Bulpett, who's, I know he's covering national, doing sort of a national beat now, and not just the Celtics, but you would expect that if he's saying stuff about the Celtics, that it's still very reliable, where he's saying that the Lakers had offered either a second or maybe even 2 seconds for Dennis Schroeder. And so then to turn around and instead trade him for Theis and get nothing back for taking this negative value contract is more of the thing that I was talking about, about like not getting the full 100% here and not working the edges about what you can pick up and where you can recover some of the second round picks and things like that you've sent out before. Maybe if they had all their second round picks, then you could be packaging second round picks and not giving out far future pick swaps. Who knows? So it's just it was a weird move. It's a weird contract. It's not to say that it can't possibly work out, because if they trade Al Horford in the offseason and Theis becomes your true backup center for a couple of years, like, it's not the end of the world. But does anybody think that if he was available in free agency right now, he would get multiple years at $9 million? Like, he just wouldn't, right?
Probably not. I mean, do you think
not.
you could? Yeah. Do you think you could chalk up some of him being bad to, like, Houston's a mess, right? Like, they're playing him next to Christian Wood. I'm not sure that makes really any sense. They've got KPJ out there and Jalen Green trying to play make and do their own thing. I just don't see how that's really a good place for somebody like Theis, who really just kind of needs to play off better players who know what they're doing. I mean, I don't know. Do you know? Do you have any? Did he get hurt in Houston? Like, what happened? Why is he not playing at all?
No, he's 30. I mean, he's a backup center who. The problem with that outlook is, like, I agree that Houston's garbage, and it's not the best place to play. But the larger point is that, like, centers who play their best when they're playing around other good players and who can be made to look good by other players are kind of a dime a dozen. Like, that's the whole point, right? Signing Theis to begin with is a very good example of this. It's like, oh, we're going to go and get this guy that I'm not going to say that nobody knew who he was, because scouts and people who pay attention to the German league and to, Eurobasket certainly did know who he was. But he wasn't like a high profile European player even when they signed him. And then he was a contributor in the NBA, like, right away, because he was a center and a athletic and a good fit. And some of that, if there's any diminishment of that athleticism, he's not a big guy. He's not a great shooter, So it could just be that he's kind of had his moment and guys who come to the NBA when they're older don't always stick around all that long, particularly if they're sort of, at that position and become backups and slide away. But again, like, he might come here and be better. I don't think he can come here and be better right now, because where are they going to play him unless other players get injured? And particularly if Rob Williams gets injured, like, it's kind of irrelevant. That's going to be such a big problem for the team that they won't then be a particularly good team anymore. They will go from sort of edge of contender status to something much less than that. But you said they were playing him next to Christian Wood. Like, where are they going to play him now, if not next to Al Horford or next to Robert Williams, which we saw. And now Tristan Thompson is not as good as either of those players, but like, we saw playing him at power forward next to a non-shooting center just was a disaster before. And if that's where they go back to now, and that would also mean, I assume, playing Grant Williams less, which I think would be bad as well. Like, I just don't see where he fits onto this roster, where he can prove that he's more valuable than that contract, or as valuable as that contract, unless there's injuries, or unless you're talking at least next season or maybe 2 seasons down the line. And like, you don't need to prepay backup centers a year or two in advance. Like, they're just always kind of available.
Yeah,
I
I'm
see
not
him
sure
as a
what the
really-
plan-
I like that we don't have Ennis.
Yeah, I see him as a really overqualified Enes Kanter. And yeah, potentially overpaid. We'll see. But, in this last stretch of the season, heading in towards the playoffs, where we need to find little pockets of time to rest Robert Williams, to rest Al Horford. Robert Williams being injury prone, Al Horford being old. We do need a semi-competent filler, to fill those minutes. And I think Daniel Theis, with his knowledge of the system, with his knowledge of the team and the players on it, is a very qualified person to fill that role. Could you find one cheaper? Absolutely. But do the front office think that he can actually make a contribution without having to take time to acclimate him? Probably. So I think that, obviously, I'm not paying his salary, so I probably feel a lot better about it than others might. But I feel like it could be a really solid contributor in a very small role, if that makes sense.
Well, and I think that would make a lot more sense if he was an expiring contract. Like, if you're saying, oh, we can get him now, and we're trading Schroeder out, and we're bringing Theis in, and we just picked up, somebody who's Derek White, who is going to play some amount of point guard anyway, and things like that. Like, that would make much more sense. The problem is the length of the contract. It's that there's 2 more years here. And I mean, again, I know you had mentioned stuff I said on winning plays. I'm assuming that most people listening to this did not listen to that, so I will repeat myself a little bit, and hopefully it doesn't bore anybody too much. It's that this is a team that we know has budget limitations of some amount that seem to be right around luxury tax. And like, adding that amount of salary next year is going to put them back into luxury tax territory. And so are we going to be at the trade deadline next year, or at the end of the offseason this year, and they're giving up draft assets again, some or future, young players, whatever it might be, in order to get themselves back into budget, because they're paying their backup center $26 million and then their third center $9 million? Or does it mean that they have to move off of Al Horford, that they end up, it makes even less sense to waive him now, right? Like, if you're in a position where you decide to waive Al Horford because you're saving $12 million, but then you're paying Daniel Theis $9 million, like, you would have been better off just keeping Horford and not going and getting Theis, right? Like, the sort of mathematics of where you're going down the line become difficult unless you're just like, I believe against all history that they will be a significant tax-paying team next year, to the point where they're going to be a tax-paying team to keep a quality third center that you could replace for much less money. Like, the whole picture doesn't work for me, even if I like Daniel Theis. And if it was an expiring contract, I would be like, yeah, great, sure, whatever, that's totally fine. It's 2 and 3 years down the line where you're like, that's probably going to cost us something. We probably should have got something now and didn't. And the resolution to how much he's being paid in the future may end up costing us more things and just not really working out. Or maybe they win the title this year and literally nothing matters for the next couple of years.
Now we're talking.
But I think more likely
nice.
than not, like, it doesn't quite work out that way.
Do you think Brad's scarred from all these trash backup centers he had to deal with, like Tristan Thompson, Cantor? He's just like, I'm getting
So I didn't
Theis.
mention, when you said, do I trust Brad's judgment on all these player evaluations, the one that we didn't mention there conveniently was that he brought back Enes Kanter.
That was a vibes play.
Yeah, okay, whatever. So it seems to me that it's a little bit, and you worry about this in terms of, again, like, the general practice of the front office, that's a little bit of the sort of recent head coach, the worst one being if your current head coach, of just guys going to get people that they're comfortable with and that they know. and that he had luck. He had good success when he was the coach and Theis was here. So you go and get him because, you're used to him and you know what he can do and you like him. And you don't think quite so much about the dollars and cents when there's 20 minutes left until the trade deadline. And so that's the concern there. But again, I mean, I'm not saying that he's a bad player, that he's as bad as he looked in Houston. I'm just saying that that's a negative value contract and that they should have got something for taking it, particularly if they were bypassing other opportunities with Schroeder. And they are not the Los Angeles Clippers, who have a $100 billion owner who just doesn't care about the tax on the line. Like those things, chickens will come home to roost on some of these things at some point down the line. And you just hope that the price to pay there is, small enough where you don't have to worry about it.
What would be your dream trade deadline for the C's if we're assuming it looks like Brad wanted to go out and get a starter and then probably a backup center? So who would you have targeted for those, trying to figure out, like Barnes was probably going to cost you 2 picks maybe, and like Nesmith. And then Norm Powell, I don't know what the hell Norm Powell would have cost. I mean, that was just a bizarre trade from Portland. So what would you have liked to see us done instead, especially instead of the Theis trade?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we should have traded for Luka Doncic.
Right, yeah.
And that would have, I mean, I don't know how to answer the question is the honest answer. Is like, I don't know what was possible and what was out there. For the other things that sort of exist, it's an odd thing to say that to an extent, I would rather they had traded 2 first-round picks than traded a pick swap 6 years out into the future, because you think, it's a pick swap. That's not as bad as trading a first-round pick. But, like, it's just such a wild card that it kind of throws me off for, like, what is the front office doing and why are they operating in a particular manner. I don't have any problem with targeting Derek White. Like, I've been saying for a while, and I'm not unique in this, that, like, the great gift that you have in Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum is not your offense, it's your defense. To be able to build a team that can generate offense with players who are, in the case of Jason, I think playing phenomenally well defensively this year, and Jaylen, a good defender. People will complain or argue about how good of a defender he is, but not a bad defender. To be able to generate offense from those two players who can play defense the way that they can is really a gift. But defense, we know, is a team thing, right? You have, if you put a weak link on the floor in the playoffs, it will get picked at. And most teams have to do that in order to generate offense, right? Like, you never will have a truly great defense if you have Trae Young on the floor, but you're going to have Trae Young on the floor. And so that's the gift they have. And I think it's entirely reasonable and very intelligent to build your team by saying, we are simply not going to give a weak link anywhere. And for that, Derek White is a completely reasonable player. Now, so is Harrison Barnes, right? Like, he's not a great defender, but he's not a weak link defender who teams are going to pick on, who's going to, like, undermine everything that you're doing. So as long as you aren't going after players who do that, then I think you're playing properly into what the team is doing. Like I said, I don't know what the ideal is because I don't know what the possibilities were. I said on deadline morning that it was very reasonable for this team to go in numerous different directions. Like, if there really was a future Lakers first-round pick on the table for Josh Richardson, they could have just sold Josh Richardson. And I couldn't have argued with that. Like, the asset value of a future pick a couple years out unprotected for a team that is run by morons, regardless of the fact that they just won a title, like, right, they're run by idiots.
Oh yeah.
Would have been reasonable to do, just saying, like, the asset is too good. Yeah. Doing what they did and buying, completely reasonable. Teams playing great. This is, a season where everything sort of seems to be scrambled. It could be wide open. Totally reasonable. Standing pat, like, just saying what we have is good, would have been reasonable. So I don't know. Like I said, I'm not pretending that I'm some genius with, like, the answer to all things. And what they did in terms of the players that they added are totally reasonable. I just think that the way that they paid for those players is concerning and something to watch as we go forward. It may be that it's, 2 years from now, it seems ridiculous. And it's like, oh no, they've all the moves they made from this point on seem completely, they've won all the trades on the day of. And I don't know. It's just one of those things that without a lot of track record, you're like, that's interesting, some of these things that they're doing. In terms of other things they could have done, I think that they probably should have just traded Schroeder to get these second round picks instead of going and getting the Theis contract, obviously because of the way I'm talking about it, I would still launch Ennis into space and have found Luke Cornett, fine. That's totally fine. They just signed Sam Hauser today, fine, reasonable. And then, there's the team in the long term they still need a sort of big defensive wing unless you really believe that Grant can hold up to that role like in the playoffs. And so you do see, Larry Nance was sort of a throw-in to New Orleans. I've always been a fan of his as like, if he was going to go that cheaply, it would have been nice to be able to get in on that if that was possible. Robert Covington's kind of old and doesn't play as well, I think, as he had even just a couple of years ago. But again, like, he was part of that Powell trade that you mentioned. It's really hard to tell what the valuations of either of those players were because of what they got back. But again, like, if you could go in there and like swoop in and just take one, and all of that is limited by the luxury tax position. So again, in my ideal world of my ideal offseason, you would have an ownership group that's like, spend $10 million over the luxury tax. We don't care. Go ahead and do whatever you want. And then you could add a player like that. For everything else, what they did, other than, like I said, the way they paid for it, it seems reasonable. But this is me rambling on because I can't answer your question. So I just keep talking until one of you cuts me off. And
I think you have answered it in a way. Like, there's definitely a few useful tidbits to glean from that. You did mention that, there's a necessity still to add another wing to the team. Have you backed off the emphasis on acquiring additional shooting? We saw the last couple of games, particularly in the first half against Atlanta, like Tatum and Brown both not shooting well at all, to put it lightly. Obviously, Tatum came to life in the second half of the game, and yet because of the quality of the defense, the team continues to find a way to win. And obviously qualify that, we mentioned it earlier, that these aren't exactly quality opponents, and yet we can have these poor shooting nights and win the games, using other strategies. Do you think that there's less of a need to go and pursue and potentially overpay for shooting given the current construct of the team and the quality of the defense?
Yeah, there's no rule, like there's no one way to win, right? If you can hold the team to 3 less points, then that's worth more than scoring 1 more yourself. It's like, you don't have to do it by playing any one given way. And if you have the best defense in the league by like 3 or 4 points per 100 possessions over anybody else,
it's very good.
You're almost like by default a contender, right? And they're not going to maintain that over the year. Like, the teams are not going to continue to shoot 40% against them for the long term, just because nobody in the league does that. It's not viable for that to continue to happen. And they will play better competition, and they will have worse luck. They will have games like the Utah game where every once in a while the other team just makes 22 threes, right? And it's like, that doesn't mean that you're suddenly a bad defense. It's just like, shit happens sometimes, right? Mm-hmm. But you can absolutely go and compete and win the title with an unbelievable defense. And like I said, in the long term, in the bigger picture, the gift that you have from the Jays is that you can do that. And it sometimes, I think, gets lost a little bit that how young Jason Tatum still is, right? Like, no, he's not 19 anymore. But look at where, like, Joel Embiid right now is competing for the MVP because he's in the prime years of his career. And so is Nikola Jokic. And, like, Jason's seasons away from that.
Yeah.
And if he just catches a heater in the playoffs and goes for 6 weeks shooting 45% from 3, like, the team is going to beat whoever they play. Mm-hmm. Just on, hey, we have 5 guys who defend and nobody can score against us, and our best offensive player just gets hot at the right time, right? That can happen in any one of the next 4 years before you even like get to the beginning of his real prime season.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So I don't think you have to get shooting. The other thing is that what they need isn't to overpay for shooting. They just need to find like cheap shooting, right? A little bit of like somebody who hits. So Sam Hauser is probably never going to be anything in the NBA, right? Like, undrafted guys who aren't super athletic and get to the NBA at 24 rarely become anything. And maybe he'll, everybody says, oh, he could be Duncan Robinson. Yeah, but he probably isn't. He probably won't be. But what you need is to somewhere at some point get lucky with shooting. They have this year with Grant Williams. Cheap, quality shooting from a versatile player that has really helped in certain situations. And that's really what you need, is to either get lucky or to find somebody who, you signed for the MLE, who was a career 35% three-point shooter and shoots 39% for 2 years. And like that, right? Like, it kind of solves some of your problems there. You hit a draft pick for somebody who you think is going to take a couple years to develop, and they're able to come in earlier than that and play right away. But I think, again, I think the number one thing is you need cheap shooting. Everybody needs cheap shooting around the NBA. or if you're going to overpay, it needs to be a player who is not one-dimensional as a shooter, right? You need somebody who also doesn't, again, undermine your defense because they're 6'1" and can't hold up in the playoffs, or because they're lead-footed and they can only play center. And it's great that Kristaps Porzingis can shoot, but if he can't do anything else, then like it screws you more than you gain out of the shooting, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, look, we have a quota of Reddit comments that we have to hit, being the Celtics Reddit podcast. And as you were talking, I was thinking, how am I going to weave this in? So it is a little bit of a pivot here, but I am going to start with a comment.
Speaking of cheap shooting, Ben.
Yeah, I was like, how am I going to spin this in? This is a comment from Mr. Happy Funds 89. Obviously take themselves very seriously. They say, even though his shot isn't dropping yet, I'm happy to see Pritchard playing. I hope Ime continues to go with him. I think he knows that it's critical we have a three-point shooter able to come off the bench in the playoffs, and I think Pritchard is probably our best hope of that happening right now. So, Ryan, with that said, Pritchard, are the Celtics likely to be active in the buyout market? Who are they likely to look at? And is that a good thing, given that it could relegate Peyton Pritchard to the bench and kind of squash any playing time that he's recently been gifted?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember who I was having this conversation with this morning on Twitter. And I'm blanking out on who it was, so apologies. Like,
no worries.
The fact that they are as good as they are means that if they can get Gary Harris, sure, they should go and get Gary Harris. I don't know if he's going to be bought out. If he is, every team in the league is going to be trying to sign him, right? And it'll be sort of funny, I think, if he joined this team, because not that long ago, he was like the savior of the defense in Denver in the playoffs.
Yeah.
And he would come here and I think be like the 7th best defender in the rotation for this team.
Yeah.
But he's shooting well, and like, yeah, they should go and get Gary Harris if they can. Beyond that, I don't know if there's anybody who's really going to be out there. If Robin Lopez, again, gets bought out and you go to him and say, hey, we're going to sign you and you're going to get DMP'd most nights, but if we run into Joel Embiid in the playoffs, we might try you. And he wants to come for that, then yeah, sure, fine. Go ahead and do that. But buyout guys are buyout guys for a reason, right? Like, if you're good enough to be playing in the playoffs, then you're probably not getting bought out to begin with. And I do think that it would behoove the team to play more of their young players, if nothing else, to find out what they have there. And if they're not going to play them here, then please send Aaron Nesmith to go play for the Red Claw or for the Portland, Maine Celtics. Like, he can't just waste away on the bench while the team plays an 8-man rotation for the last third of the season. So, I mean, I just don't, like I said, if there's a player the level of Gary Harris that you can get, then yeah, you should go and get him. But they don't really need a point guard. It looks like there's going to be potentially a number of point guards that are going to be out there. I don't think it makes any sense to like be targeting a 30, a Derek Favors style big when you've already got too many bigs to begin with. If you really want another big, like, again, go sign a 23-year-old from the G League like you just did with Hauser pulling somebody out from there. I mean, obviously he was already on a two-way, but like, I don't know. The buyout guys I've gone through enough years of buyout guys across the league to not be fooled by them as much anymore.
They never seem to fall our way either.
I was just going to say, we always
never
get the guy we actually want, and then whoever we get is useless. Except that one, PJ Brown, that was it. He won.
PJ Brown wasn't
game.
a buyout, right?
I thought he was.
Wasn't a buyout though.
Oh, he wasn't.
No, he was retired, and he basically sat out all the way up until the deadline for signing because he basically knew what he was going to do. Like, he was sitting on the sidelines waiting for Kevin Garnett to be like, now's the time. Let's go win a title together, and then he went back into retirement. But no, he wasn't actually a buyout. The buyout guys just never work for us.
Yeah, or never come here at all.
Yeah, exactly. Or they're Greg Monroe, and then they come back and somehow they defeat us with a freaking skeleton crew of a team. 4 years later, just Greg Monroe this year. He showed us he should have paid us back for all of that buyout money we gave him years ago.
There's another comment here from user Chinese Fox 97. They say, you know why I believe we can win it all? Because we're winning even though our defense, or rather our offense, has been terrible. We're missing a ton of shots. JB and JT are missing a ton of threes. We shot 27% and 29% the last 2 games and still ended up winning because of our defense, which I think segues into this question, Ryan, as we start to wrap up here. How optimistic do you feel about a deep playoff run? And in your mind, are you targeting any specific matchups in that sort of first or second round?
Right. We talked about it a little bit already, right? It was saying like if Jason Tatum gets hot for a month or 2 months, then they not can beat anybody, like they will beat anybody, right? And yeah, I think that they have a chance to win the title that is being underplayed by most people. You see these sort of analytics models like 538 and the one, I think there's one based on the Darko projection. It's not even really a stat, but whatever it is. And some others that have the Celtics in the sort of like 10 to 12% range in terms of being title, their title favorites, or not title, their title odds. That seems a bit high to me. Vegas has them at like 2%. That seems a bit low. But if you're in that range of like 5 to 8%, then again, something I said on a few days ago on the other pod, it's like, if something happens that had 5% odds in sports, like that is an upset, but that doesn't register as like some amazing thing that you remember forever as this like outlier. I can't believe that this happened that one time. Those things do happen sometimes. So in terms of like how far they can get in the playoffs, yeah, it would help if they draw the Bulls with 3 guys injured, right? Or the Cavs playing well, but with guys who have never played in the playoffs before and are, sort of experiencing it for the first time. Like I would rather play them than the Bucks. I would rather play them than the Sixers early on if the Sixers mesh right away. This isn't a surprise that if everybody is healthy for the Nets, Kevin Durant is really good, and I would rather be playing against Darius Garland than than Kevin Durant. So yeah, the matchups are helpful, but like in the end, it comes down to if the team continues to play as well as they have played to this point for basically the entire season when they were healthy, right? They had when were they bad? Very early in the season, they gave up too many points, and everybody who was watching the game was like, they clearly don't know what they're doing yet in this system. Then they play really well from game like 7 or 8, something like that, up until they go on the West Coast trip. And they go on this trip, and Jalen's injured. They're starting Smart and Schroeder together. They give up 1 million points. There's like kind of weird disaster games in there. Okay, fair enough. A period of legitimately bad play, but with one of your 2 best players sidelined. Then you have COVID, and the entire league goes to shit, and nobody has any idea what any of those games mean. And they have a bunch of bad losses in there, but welcome to the club. Like, it's all total mess. And then they get healthy, and they just kill people. They're just rolling over everybody. And like, it's hard to say that what they've had done recently is sustainable for forever, because they're not going to be a plus 12 net rating for the rest of the year, I don't think. But like, if they just continue on being like a plus 6 or plus 7 team for the rest of the year, then they absolutely go into the playoffs where they can beat anybody. Can they win? Can they beat anybody 4 times in through 4 different series and win the title? Like, maybe. I don't think it's likely. And because the East is difficult, they could draw the Bucks in round 1 in some weird, 4-5 matchup and get bounced. And that, like, it would suck. But it's a possibility. It's just, again, I can't see the future. And I talk about these things sort of too probabilistically, and everybody wants like black and white. And it's like, no, the team is really good. There's other really good teams out there. I'm very much looking forward to seeing them play against each other in 7-game series, and let's see what the hell happens. Because I also feel a little bit good about it that I have a fallback of like, Jason's about to turn 24, so we're gonna get to do this again next year, and the year after that, and the year after that, and one of these years things are gonna click, as long as we don't screw it up along the way, and that feels good. And I think if you want to go all the way back, and I'll just keep rambling here, to talking about asset evaluations and what is Brad doing, and the thing that you can talk about in there is they have put a team together for the next couple of years where they won't have to go out necessarily and be buyers because or be like big time buyers, unless like a good opportunity where they're like, this trade is a clear win, because they do have this core of a team that's now locked up for a couple of years that you look at and you're like, yeah, I mean, when Jason Tatum's 26, this team might be really, really good. Mm-hmm. And the same guys are going to be around, because Jason's going to be 26 and Jalen's going to be 28 and Rob's going to be 25 and Marcus is going to be 30 and like Derek White will be 31. Like, they might just be kicking ass at that point, right? So I think that's where I look at it more than anything, is that this is not a one and done team where it's like all the eggs are right now and like, if win it this year or next year or you're screwed. Yeah. They could win it this year, but they could win it 3 years from now, and that's good.
Is this the best you felt about the Celtics in the short Jays era so far? That's kind of that's the vibe I'm getting from you, Ryan, that this is maybe like the most promising point of their tenure with the team so far.
Well, I mean, they've been to between them, both of them together, they've been to 2 conference finals. So
Sure.
I know that gets written off a lot. Like, I don't understand that. That's a real achievement.
Yeah.
They've been good since they got here. They've played on good teams since they got here. And like it does get easy to lose sight of that because I think the front office has let them down in a number of different ways since all of the great things they did to get to the point of adding them. So I think and you can get lost in that. And I can get lost in that. Absolutely. More than anybody, I can get lost in that, completely admitting to that. And the last year has been difficult with just a lot of weird things and injuries, and the world has sucked, and it hasn't been a fun team to watch. But do I feel better about them now than I did when they were playing in a conference finals and Jason was dunking on LeBron James? No, right?
That's fair.
You're literally sitting there 2 minutes away from going to the finals. So this is not the highest that I felt for them. But I think that things are very promising, and that from you, to go to that commenter, they are not. I don't believe that they are going to shoot 32 and 34% over their careers, and that if they continue to play defense like they have and develop in other ways, and just the shots start falling, you have an all NBA player and an all-star going into their primes playing on the wing for the best defense in the league, pretty good starting point to be able to work from that.
So do you see this? There's all this Bradley Beal talk, right? Do you see big game hunting with Beal almost overly risky, considering one, his age? He's going to make $1 billion on his new contract, and we'd have to probably give up, all the picks, basically. Because it sounds like you're pretty high on the team. I am too. I think this team's really come together, and defense plays, man. So I'm kind of talking myself out of even needing kind of that quote unquote third star. I think maybe you get 1 or 2 more real high end role players and things will look, even better, and they're already getting close.
That's been a sort of, I guess, I don't know. I think it's probably Zach Lowe's conversation that he goes back to every offseason about the difference between 2 and 3 stars, and are you better off having this or that? And the argument for 3 stars indemnify you some amount against injuries. But in those cases, you are really talking about players who I think are a higher level in that. Bradley Beal and Jason Tatum maybe could still compete for a title. I don't think that a Bradley Beal, Jaylen Brown team with Jason injured for the season would be a competitor, right? I don't know how much it actually protects you against that with all-star players instead of first team first ballot Hall of Famer, multiple all NBA top, guys like that. I think it's a little bit different there. And I think both are, acceptable ways to build a team. Beal does worry me a little bit because as I was, is Beal the guy who can get picked on defense, and that undermines everything else that you've been able to build. He's not a terrible defender always, but he certainly has been a terrible defender at times, and he would certainly give every team would pick on him. And would he break in a playoff series, particularly as he gets a few years older and with quite a lot of miles on him? Because he came in, you said his age, he's not old because he came into the league so incredibly young, but he will have a lot of miles on him, and he will make an ungodly large amount of money for a team that has a budget. If you can, if ownership says we don't care, we've been saving all this money for years for this moment, go ahead and spend wildly, and you can go and get him for Al Horford and Derek White and all your picks, okay. I'm not going to say that that's a bad idea, but I don't know that it guarantees you of anything, and I think it's, again, reasonable to go about it another way. And if it's you can go get him, but it's Marcus Smart and Derek White and Rob Williams and fewer picks, no. I don't think that would work out. I think that you would hamstring yourself in too many other ways in terms of your current talent and how you could fill out the roster then around that, and how you've would sort of again undermine the gift that you have in the Jays. So I don't think it's clear. I think it depends on what the price is. And of course, the one caveat to all of that is if Jason Tatum says, this is my team and I want you to go and sign my best friend, then that, right, every team in the league sort of takes out of your hands. But I don't think you're talking about it from that standpoint. I think you're talking about more from the team building.
Yeah.
And again, this is what I do, right? I come on and I ramble on and I don't really give you answers to your questions because I don't know the answers to them, because these things aren't black and white, right? These things live in a gray. If you could solve all these problems with a spreadsheet, it wouldn't be fun, right? It's the fact that we can't answer these things that makes it interesting to begin with. So we bullshit about it until we find out.
Yeah, it's fun to talk about. That's why we're all here. I do have to wrap up with a question that will for sure alienate our US audience, and that is about the Ashes. And I think you tweeted about it.
See you
A few
guys.
months ago. See you, Spirits. You tweeted about it a few months ago, Ryan. And if I could have made a list of people who I'd be 100% positive would not be interested in cricket or the Ashes, I think dangercart would probably be on that list. So it definitely piqued my interest. We do have a sizable cohort of Aussie listeners, obviously. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into Ashes cricket? Did you pay attention to it this year? I'm morbidly curious.
Right. So the real original architect of Celtics Reddit is from Geelong, right? He's an Aussie, and aside from loving the Celtics, also loves particularly he loves Aussie football. He's a Geelong Cats fan, and was
Typical.
also a mod for Peloton, right? So he's a big, not the workout equipment, but he's a cycling fan, and also a cricket fan, and I was living in Hong Kong when I was first sort of joined Celtics Reddit, and then I lived in London for a little bit, and so I happened to live in London during 2 Ashes series, and every day I'm talking to my friend Tim, who is one of the other moderators on the Reddit, who's in Australia following the Ashes, and he's teaching me about this dumbass sport that takes 5 days, and oh, by the way, there's 5 of them. It's not a 5-day thing. It's a 5 times 5-day thing.
Yeah,
and
brilliant.
then, they're going to go and they're going to do it again against India and then against the Windies. I don't know, right? Like, it's just an insane sport. And who could imagine why they've been desperately trying to find ways that take 2 hours instead of 2.5 weeks. So it's just, what it is that, one, you want to talk shit to your friends. And so I'm in London and he's in Australia, and you want to be able to do that. It's also, for anybody who's interested, who's been working from home during pandemic times or anything else, wonderful background noise. It goes on all day long. Nothing really happens. It just sort of sits there on the other screen or in the background, and it's sporting, and something is happening, and that's the Tour de France. That's the other, I love the Tour de France, very similar. It just is a thing that happens all day long on the computer screen in the back. So I'm not going to pretend that I'm some, great observer of cricket, but I can't help but get sucked into Ashes fever.
Look, I think that the fact that you know about cricket and the Ashes at all, just its mere existence, puts you in the top echelon of American cricket fans. I detest and reject the notion that nothing happens in cricket. That is false. But look, next time we have you on, we can put aside 10 minutes and we can discuss the ins and outs of cricket and how so much is happening at all times. Brian.
Well, also, you get, just to throw, Douglas Adams and a tiny little trophy. That also sucks me in.
Of course, why not?
Yeah, for anybody who doesn't know, the Ashes trophy is like 3 inches. It's the tiniest little trophy. It's hilarious.
It's not the size that matters.
That's right. Good things come in small packages.
That's right. Look, that's all the time we've got for this one. We'll be back with another pod later in the week. In the meantime, you can follow Ryan on Twitter at dangercart. Let's be honest, if you know who we are, then you almost certainly know who dangercart is. But you can keep track of his insights and his various podcast appearances there. Ryan, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
Thanks for listening, folks. If you're enjoying the show, please subscribe, rate, share, etc. Huge thanks to Ryan Bernardoni, Wayne Spooney, and the Celtics for being super cool and winning lots of games. Peace.